Welcome to Accelerating UI Development. In this session, we'd like to talk about two ways we can accelerate user interface development, and the first is screen templates. So we'll talk about how we can create template-based screens and then view the sample data that is included inside those screens and potentially replace that sample data. We'll also talk about another pattern which is called scaffolding. And scaffolding allow us to create either portions of screens or full screens. So we'll look at how scaffolding can help us quickly create a list screen as well as a detailed screen. So let's go ahead and get started. So in accelerating UI development, OutSystems has two major sets of accelerators that can help us: the screen templates, which we can see here on the left, and the scaffolding patterns, which we can see here on the right. So we're going to talk about both of these, and they take a slightly different approach to how we build screens more quickly. So for screen templates, we actually have pre-built screens that implement different types of scenarios and include both the logic and data needed for those scenarios. So we might have different types of dashboards, we might have different lists of products and information, and even, different types of galleries where we can see information. So there are a lot of different types of templates that are available to create new screens. So how would we use a template to create a new screen? Well, if we ask for a new screen, the new screen wizard or helper will come up, and what it will do is it will show us all the different templates that are available. And if we're looking for a specific type of template, there are different categories of templates to the left, and by clicking on any of the categories, it will filter the ones that we're seeing. But if we find a template like the 4-column gallery that we like, we can select it, and then it will show us in more detail that template to the right. If that's a template that we would like to start with as far as building our new screen, all we have to do is give the new screen a name and click Create Screen. And what it will do is it will actually create a screen that is a copy of that template. And that copy will include the whole layout, all of the widgets, any of the UI styling, and all of the logic to be able to go ahead and work on that screen. It will all be built with the OutSystems UI components that are part of those templates. And once it's created, we can immediately publish it and begin testing it, using it, looking at it. All of it will be there because it will be a live screen in that particular environment. So this significantly speeds up the development because we already are starting with a working screen. And then from there we can go ahead and edit or change that screen as needed. Now the screen will have data inside of it, and that will actually be sample data. So that's just there to help populate the user interface and make sure that when the logic is trying to save or validate different types of information, that it's actually using real data. At any point, this will or can be replaced by your data. So when we talk about this sample data, the sample data consists of example entities and records that are going to support the scenarios that exist inside of those screen templates. So the sample data will be inside the screens that get created or copied from the templates. Now all of the sample data is actually inside of one module, and it's called the OutSystems Sample Data DB module. And when we create a new screen, if there's sample data inside of it, this module will become a dependency of our module. So here we can see a picture of the OutSystems Sample DB module, and inside of it, it has entities for employees, which offices, departments. It has some static entities on priorities and statuses. So you can see that there are a number of different entities that are available to help us build those screens. If at any time you want to view that data, maybe re-import or reset that data, there is a back office set of screens that will allow you to manipulate that data. If you go to your server and then go to OutSystems Sample Data, that module will actually bring up all of those screens so that you can go ahead and work with the sample data in that module. Now, once the sample data is there, you may wish to replace that sample data. So the sample data that is in the screen can easily be replaced by real data. So here's an example where we're taking an order and placing it inside of this table record. So it actually changed what was there before to go ahead and modify it. And if we look at this again, you can see that this was actually a set of requests to make updates. So there were some requests for work to be done, and instead of a request list, it's now been changed to an order list. So the request list that we start with, when we drag and drop the orders, it automatically does a mapping, but it can't do that mapping perfectly because not all the requests attributes are the same as the order attributes. So sometimes there are some errors that pop up. So if we look at this in more detail, how replace data actually works is that we'll drag and drop the real entity with data to a widget that will support data replacement. So here we can see the table records, and the table records supports data replacement. So we dragged and dropped the order to what was the list. So this was a request. This was a request table records, and now we're actually changing it to an order. So what Service Studio will do is it will map all of the fields it can from, in this case, our request sample entity to our real order entity. And it will do that by looking at the names of the attributes and trying to map those. And if it can't find names, it will try to find similar data types. So it's being done by the machine, so the matching may not come out perfectly. So it's not always the optimal set of matches, but at least it does a match. So that will give us the capability of going in and looking at what has been mapped, and then we may have to modify that because it may not be exactly what we want. Now this replace data is something that we're going to use with templates, because a lot of times the templates have sample data and we'll wish to go ahead and change that. But this replace data will work on any screen. So any screen that might have a table records that has one set of data, if we wish to replace that data with something different, we just drag and drop the entity to the table records, and it will try to do the mapping and go ahead and put in the data inside of that particular table record. So after that replace data occurs, we may wish to look at true change to find the errors and the warnings that have occurred when the mapping isn't able to be done very perfectly or very simply. So we may have to fix those errors and warnings to use the real data properly. And sometimes either the sample data has more attributes than the real entity, or the real entity has more attributes than the sample. So sometimes we may need to delete certain parts of unnecessary information, and we need to look at all the mappings. So we can go down to true change in the lower left, and in the true change area, we can look for any of the errors that exist. And we could double click on those errors and it will show us where the error exists and even take us to the expression or value that might be causing the problem. Then we have to look at the two different types of data, decide what to do next, and go ahead and update the data that is there. So that's it for the templates and being able to kind of update them. Sometimes it takes a bit of work. The other type of accelerations that we have are what we call the scaffolding patterns. The scaffolding patterns provide some automation for data-driven screens. So it will be able to create screens and logic in just a few clicks, and it's a good starting point sometimes for building data-driven applications. And once the basics are built, it will still allow us to change and customize anything else we need depending on what the end users will really want to be able to work with. So these scaffolding patterns allow us to create things like a list screen, a detail screen. We can even update the detail screen with an extra list for a master screen. We can create context pop-ups and info balloons that will go ahead and show information in different areas, and several other types of behaviors that can be done using these scaffolding patterns. So if we start with the one that is used quite often, creating the list screen, you can create a list screen very easily by dragging an entity to a UI flow. It will automatically create a list screen. And any of the logic and user interface pieces that are needed are automatically created. And once they're created, we can modify them. So if we wanted to get a screen to show the list of employees, we just drag the employee entity to the UI flow. Here we see the main flow. And by dragging it, you can see it's going to create an employee's screen. And there's a star here. And the stars inside of OutSystems always show us when things are going to be automatically created for us. And it tries to alert us to what types and where those things are being created. So the second we dropped the screen here, if we double clicked on it, then we could open what was created for us. And here we can see that we have an employees list screen that has a table records to list all of the employees with their first name, last name, birth date, email. It will always choose the first 4 attributes that it can display. And it's also added a search capability and navigation at the bottom so that we could go through different pages of these if there are a lot of employees inside of the list. So once it was able to create that list screen, the next thing we could do is create a detail screen. And it's as easy as dragging that entity to the UI flow for the second time. Doing it the second time will create a detail screen. And again, it creates all the user interface components and logic that is needed. And if we don't like exactly what's there, we could go in and modify or change it. So if we drag employee to the UI flow again, you can see that an employee detail screen would be created. And again, we have the star to show us that there's going to be automatic generation of things occurring. And if we double clicked on the screen once it was created, we can see that a detail screen is being shown that has a form in it that's going to show all the information about the employee. And sometimes we'll call this detail screen because we know which employee. Maybe we were on the list screen and clicked on a link that took us to that employee's detail. And in that case, we would see that employee's first name. Or sometimes we just want to create a brand new employee. So if we clicked on something like a plus sign, it could take us to this detail screen. And because there is no employee information inside of it, the form would be blank, but we could go ahead and create a new employee by saving the information in this form. So that's it for the accelerated UI components. We looked at how screen templates can help us build screens a little bit faster. And to make sure we get exactly what we want, we need to replace the sample data that's there. And that may be a bit of work because the automated mapping may not always turn out perfectly. And then we looked at scaffolding patterns, and we looked at the first 2 steps in scaffolding, which are usually creating the list screen and creating the detail screen. But there are also a lot of other cool things that you can do with scaffolding that you may want to go ahead and test out and try on your own. So that's it for accelerating UI development. Thanks for listening.